Hi, friends. Sam Redondo here, licensed therapist, embodiment coach, and your host of the Spiritual Embodiment Podcast. Welcome. This is a place where we explore where our why meets our what, or said another way, where our real life lived experience of being a body meets our meaning making, trying to make sense of this chaotic world we live in. So, I'm so happy that you're here, that you're listening today, and I'm looking forward to diving into this topic of relational regulation, of community co-regulation, relationship. What does it look like to be a body with other bodies? What does it look like to live our life with other people? Embodiment and spirituality both don't happen in a vacuum of our individuality. They are equally and both highly communal. And so I wanted to take the time to really outline, why I think relationship is so important as a therapist, as a human, as someone who is spiritual, and also like how that can be tricky. So I had Victoria on the podcast in my last episode, and if you haven't listened, it's just, if I do say so myself, such a delightful conversation. So I highly recommend going back and listening to that when you get a chance. But we kind of ended up talking about, what does community look like on the other side of rigid religious experiences, communities, cults? Like, how do you find friends? A big kind of echo that I hear across folks, whether clients or not, who have been in these communities is like why leaving is so hard is because you lose so many people. You lose so many relationships that were built kind of around these shared beliefs and experiences and proximity in these spaces. And it can be really devastating to lose not only a belief system and maybe you move cities, maybe a home, but also like a group of people, friends, community, even partners. And so I thought it was so important to talk about relationship in light of this, because I think so many of us have had seasons, whether from a religious community or other community, maybe we left a job or we graduated from college, or, there was some kind of rupture, whether negative or positive or neutral, that happened. And we found ourselves alone. We found ourselves in a place of trying to piece back together a community, make friends, kind of figure out our place when it comes to connection and belonging, which are such core human needs, which I'll get more into as we go along. And so I wanted to start with kind of my story of, and I mentioned this a little bit in a previous episode, but when I left Bethel and really was deconstructing from Christianity, or what I had known it to be up until that point, I moved back home in with my parents. This was in my late 20s. And so it was definitely like a humbling experience of living back with mom and dad and kind of going about life in the ways that they did, and really feeling pretty isolated. A lot of the friends that I had in that church community kind of stopped talking to me, or it just felt like we didn't have much in common. I also, I felt really hurt still by that community. And so to keep relationship with people who still were really embedded and like really kind of drank the Kool-Aid was difficult, was hard for me. And one thing that, Victoria and I mentioned in our last episode is like, we both left Bethel around the same time. And, it was like within weeks of each other. And so having that friendship, having another person who did the same thing as me, like taking the bold, brave, scary step to leave the community and leave the city. And we both ended up moving home. She went back to Nashville and I went down to Southern California. And so, having someone who was in the thick of it with me, who, even though we weren't living in the same city anymore, we could call each other on the phone and FaceTime and like have these late night chats of, what are we doing with our lives? Like, this is so crazy. We don't know which way is up, but like, we know we have each other and we can encourage each other. And that was game changing for me, was life changing. So I'm so grateful for her. And I do think like that season strengthened our friendship so much to be able to weather many other seasons of life, to be able to weather long distance over years and years. And, both of us being partnered now, I feel like our relationship has evolved and changed and really is so supportive for both of us. Now we're each running businesses and have a lot of entrepreneurial chats and how to grow our businesses and things like that, and encouraging and supporting each other in that way too. So it's really beautiful to grow and evolve with a friend over, over 15 years, close to 20 years maybe now, that we've gotten to be in each other's lives and flowed in and out, but really trusting that that friendship can be what it needs to be. And so in thinking about this season, I really wanted to reflect on like what was helpful in like coming out of this isolating place. So one was like having a friend kind of in the thick of it with me, having someone who understood. And I think for most people, you probably aren't leaving this community with a buddy. Like, I think my experience was pretty rare in having one of my best friends leave at the same time. But I think when you're leaving a community, whether religious or not, dealing with the isolation, feeling alone can make us feel really helpless and frozen. And so I think finding like, even if they're not perfectly aligned, like forever value-based friendships, that are going to be in your life for the rest of your life, just finding like proximity friends. And this is something that Victoria talked about in the last episode, was like, she just went to like a church college group because that was her grid of like, how do I meet people in Nashville when she first moved there? And so many of those kids were 10 years younger than her, definitely in a different season of life with different priorities, with different, kind of confidence and expectations, whether realistic or not. And she was like, I just needed to be around people. And that was really helpful during that time. And so I think, thinking about my story, I ended up applying for grad school. That's when, after this season of leaving Bethel and being with my parents for a bit, ended up moving to LA and starting grad school and getting a part-time job. And I found my own proximity friends during that season. Folks in my cohort at grad school with me were all training to be therapists together. I just found the deepest friendships there because we're all very like thoughtful, emotionally intelligent people, want to be therapists. And I just found a group of girls like day one who we ended up like kind of sitting together in every class. That's how a cohort works, is we all, are taking the same classes throughout the 2 years together. And so just found this group of like 4 girls who we could really go deep and build friendship. And we had so much shared experience of like learning to be therapists together and going through these like pretty big new experiences of like getting out of our comfort zone and learning all these things, and also doing our own deep work as we're learning about therapy. And I was still deconstructing at the time, and a lot of them were too, or had. And so we had these really similar backgrounds and experiences, and we're also like headed in a similar direction, which was so helpful to form really deep bonds. And I'm so grateful. In fact, like 2 of the guests I've had on, Morgan and Caitlin on the pod, were 2 of my girls from grad school in that group. And I'm so grateful for them. And I hope to have my dear friend Jess on the pod eventually, because she was part of that group too. And yeah, I'm just so thankful that I had those relationships, because I don't think I would have gone through that season without them. So other proximity friends that I found during that season was through this like part-time job that I had, which was like working for an outdoor store, and just found like fun friends who enjoyed similar stuff. So we all liked hiking and climbing and being outside and going to the beach. And I just like, even though we were folding t-shirts, like it was just nice to have friends that we could just like hang out with. And honestly, for me, like I hadn't had a lot of friends outside of the church. Like growing up playing volleyball, like I was always on club teams with girls who weren't religious at all. But I think my experience then of being younger was very like feeling very othered and like different from all these girls that were talking about like dating and partying and all these things that I wasn't having the same experiences as. And so honestly, like this experience of working at this outdoor store while I was in grad school was really reparative for me, because it felt like I could just have fun friends that weren't religious. What was connecting us wasn't our belief system. It was just our love of the outdoors and the fact that we needed a job. And, I'm still friends with a lot of those people, even though this was years and years ago, because it really bonded us. You're like there every day, you're doing kind of menial tasks, but you really do have that like proximity time spent together that forms deep bonds. And I think with the shared love of adventure and the outdoors, we ended up going on a lot of trips together and doing a lot of outdoor activities together, like backpacking and skiing and climbing. And that really bonded us too. And so those are like our trip buddies still. In fact, one of those friends ended up being my husband. We ended up getting married. And so we still travel and enjoy time with a lot of those folks that we initially met working in outdoor retail together. So I think, what I wanted to name, both in the grad school friends and the retail friends, like both of these communities gave me like proximity friendships of just like, who is in my world right now that I can find community with, even if like, there was a massive gap between the kinds of conversations I was having with my grad school friends and my work friends. Like grad school, we were talking about like our hearts and our emotions and like our childhoods and all these deep thoughts and therapy and, just like the deep end of everything. And then my work friends, it was like stupid, TikTok reels, or who was the best runner in the world, or what cool jacket was coming out. Like it was just like stuff that kind of didn't matter, but it was interesting for us and it was fun for us to talk about. And so I think having both of those types of relationships in my life during that season really, really helped me to find my own way to feel resourced relationally. And what I mean by that is like to know that I'm okay, that I'm safe enough, that I'm connected, that I belong in these communities, in these spaces, when a lot of that belonging got really shaken leaving Bethel. So I'm so grateful for those friendships. So we probably all know like relationships are important, right? Like we need them to live, to survive. We've probably heard that there's a loneliness epidemic in our generation and especially in America. But I don't think many of us understand like why relationships are so important and what they have to do with embodiment. It may seem like embodiment is a very individual activity. I'm focused on my own body sensations and experiences, my own experience moving through the world. How is that? How is another person a part of that? And I would beg to differ that embodiment is a communal and relational experience. So Dr. Hilary McBride brilliantly said, embodiment is always an attachment experience. And what she means by this is the body is the cumulative memory of our relationships and social context. So one way that I like to think about this is our body remembers the felt sense of all our experiences. And felt sense is a way to talk about like the feeling you get when you're with this person or the feeling that you had in that experience. So it's different than maybe like a memory where you're like telling the narrative story. Sometimes we can tell a narrative story and know like logically I was safe. Logically there was no threat there. But the felt sense of that memory was like I felt really scared, or I felt really dropped, or I felt really like not safe in this experience. And so our bodies are the cumulative memory of all these felt sense moments that we've had in relationships in our life. So from early attachment, what I tell a bit of my story on the podcast of being a premature baby and, having some early attachment injuries just because I had to be in this incubator and I, couldn't be held or couldn't go home for a while to survive, but my little emotional self didn't know that. And I've had to heal some of that attachment injury. So like that's a memory, a felt sense memory in my body about the story of my relationships, the story of my attachment, that, I've had to have my own meaning making around belonging and feeling alone and being wanted and loved. That all started from that early experience. So these attachment experiences can impact our sense of embodiment because our body holds these stories even if we have lived long past them. So, I can imagine, like me, you've had an experience of, being with another person where maybe they say something or something happens and all of a sudden you have like a big feeling come up where you feel alone, you feel betrayed, fill in the blank. And that this person loves you. Maybe it's your friend, maybe it's your partner. Like, logically, like, I know they're on my team. I know they're not trying to hurt me, but right now they feel like the scariest person. They feel like, they're about to just abandon me and, it's the end. And, I think this is important to name because those experiences are coming from our emotional selves and from our bodies, not necessarily our logical minds. And so when we see the body as this cumulative memory of relationships, this cumulative memory of what it's like for us to move through the world, and have other people have opinions of us, objectify us, judge us, love us or hate us, have all of these just kind of mix of experiences and feelings. Our body carries all of that, and that informs how we respond in our relationships today. I also think that the body is a pathway to connection that can just open up. When we're experiencing embodiment, we can connect deeply to ourselves. We can connect deeply to the collective, to nature, to spirituality, to meaning. And it's truly, the body is truly a pathway to aliveness. And so that's why I love somatic work, with starting with the body, starting with movement, starting with our own awareness of self. Then we can broaden that perspective to, how am I connected to other bodies? Where am I in relationship to the other bodies in the room? And then like those bodies are also have their own experience, their own emotions, their own, just brilliance and gifts. And how can we do this dance of reciprocity, of giving and receiving in community, in the collective? And that's just like where the magic happens, where we really get a sense of our connection to it all, to the web of all life, to all the creatures, all the plants, all the humans, the more than human world. And so this is like part of the work I do is I run these monthly workshops called Mindful Movements with my dear friend, Kate, who I'm hoping to have on here soon, who's a trauma sensitive yoga instructor. And part of what we do is we're doing yoga and movement, and we're, practicing embodiment, but we're also kind of bouncing between like our own awareness of our own experience and awareness of the other people in the room, awareness of what's happening collectively, awareness of, it's what we call in therapy our usness. So there's like a you and a me, and then there's us. And that sense of us kind of takes on a life of its own, a personality of its own, if you will, where, I had a professor who would always say like, he didn't like going to the ballet, but his wife liked going to the ballet, but their usness loves the ballet. And he's like, I don't just mean I do what my wife wants because I love her. I mean, like, I could care less about ballet, but the dressing up, the going to dinner before, seeing her light up when we get to the theater, having this whole experience together, I love that. And so there's like this different reality that could happen when we're having a communal, relational, collective experience where there's like a knowing and an emotional quality of the collective that kind of takes on a life of its own. It becomes more than the sum of all the individuals. There's kind of this other sense of, another way to say it is intercorporeality. So just like that connection between bodies, between humans that happens when we're all kind of sharing an intention, when we're all moving in the same direction together in a group. You maybe have felt this at, in like a group yoga class or workout class where it feels like you reached another level. Maybe you felt this in like even like worship or at a concert where there's like collective singing and dancing, and you kind of get that euphoric moment of something bigger than you happening in the room. That's the idea of intercorporeality. And so I think, in these workshops, I've just seen week after week this magic happen where, we're not overly trying to get people to connect. Like, we're not doing small talk. We're not doing icebreaker games. Like, oh, it just reminds me of youth group, right? Like all the stupid ways they would try to make us connect. But we're just being bodies moving together in similar ways, being thoughtful, practicing awareness, practicing mindfulness. And by the end of the time, something shifts where people want to connect. They're like, oh, it felt so good to not have to do the small talk, to not have to play the games, but just to connect in a way that I felt like I belonged, that I felt like I didn't have to do anything to prove that I'm here, a part of this thing that we're all doing together. And I'm obsessed. Like, I'm so in love with this work because it does truly feel like magic. It truly feels like we've tapped into just something that's already happening with humans that I really think is like that reflective, reciprocal thing of like, I'm knowing you, you're knowing me, and we also have this like third personality of the we, of the usness that is happening. And that's like what helps us connect with aliveness, what helps us connect with meaning and belonging. So essentially, this is the idea that like we can know ourselves or build our self-awareness through relationship, through community. And part of why this is real, like the science behind this, is mirror neurons. So there's studies that have shown like when we experience, so I'll say it in first person, when I experience myself as like you, so like things we have in common, shared values, shared beliefs, shared qualities and characteristics, the mirror neurons in my brain have greater activation. So they're like pinging and going off more to say like, ooh, yes, like this is connecting, this is belonging. But if I perceive myself as being different from you, so I'm focused on all the ways we're different, maybe there's judgment, maybe there's, like comparison, that research shows I actually have weakened empathy and mirror neuron activation. So I just think that's wild because I think that's something we've tapped into with these workshops without even really doing it intentionally or trying to, is finding ways that we are like each other. So like looking around the room when we're in a yoga pose and seeing how the bodies, are also doing the same thing as our body in the room. And this is actually like playing into the neuroscience of our mirror neurons are activated. There's more empathy, there's more connection, there's more belonging that's coming online when we're aware of the ways that we are like each other. Another way that we can think about this is the idea of the reciprocating self. So I've talked about the idea of reciprocity a lot in this podcast because it's something that is just a big value of mine. But this is the idea that the self concept is formed and maintained in the context of community and relationships. So really that we truly can't know ourselves, know what we are like until we see ourselves in another, until we have another to reflect back into. I always think about little babies, infants, when mom is smiling and talking and looking in their eyes, we always think like, oh, the baby's happy to see me. He's smiling. He's looking in my eyes. And it's like, no, the baby's just mirroring what you're doing. And you can try frowning. The baby will probably frown. Like that is their mirror neurons developing and them learning about social interaction, learning about attachment, learning like, how do I exist in the world? How do I exist relationally? All of that is happening for them on this like really fast micro level, unconscious level, but we get to see it on their faces. And so, something called prosody, where, I will say something, reflect something, and then that gets reflected back to me. There's kind of this back and forth that happens. And another way, that this shows up of like how we know ourselves in relationships is we truly need secure relationships and these like safe relational containers to know ourselves and express our identity. And we can see this in child development where, if kids haven't had that safe relational container, they might be kind of like stunted growth wise in some ways, and some like big developmental steps. There might be like a flat affect, which pretty much means like low emotional expression. They might be acting out in ways that like isn't actually true to who they are, but it's just to get attention, to get their needs met, to get somebody to do something, because there's neglect or whatever going on. And so I think like having those secure attachment, safe relational containers allows us to explore like, who actually am I? And I always think about, myself in middle school. I went to a private school and we had school uniforms. So like pretty hideous plaid skirts and like polo shirts. And it was all very like blue, green, black based colors. And, I decided like we didn't have any rules about like the color of socks we could wear or jewelry or things like that. And so I decided to wear these like neon rainbow over the knee socks and bright pink shoes and piles of necklaces and jewelry just to like have my own self-expression. And, I think that's so true of that developmental stage of like middle school, especially, but high school too, is like, we're just experimenting. We're trying stuff on. We're throwing stuff against the wall to see what our peers think, what our family thinks. Like, can I express, and like what feedback comes back to me? And it's such a good developmental step. And, that is a way that like we know ourselves through relationships. Another way that I think relationships are so valuable, especially, when we leave these communities and spaces and are on a healing journey, whether it comes to embodiment or spirituality or both, relationships allow us to reparent and repair what got missed in childhood. And this has been so true of my relationship with Victoria. We obviously had like the spiritual trauma that we went through together, but we have really similar stories around like our moms and like what we felt like got missed for us growing up. And so a big part of like our time at Bethel and even afterwards was kind of being mother figures for each other at certain times. And, that might sound a little weird and codependent. And like, yeah, there might have been moments that it was, but I think what it really looked like for us was the ability to hold safe witness and hold space for the other person's emotional process in a way that was attuned, in a way that was empathetic, in a way that was generous and kind and supportive, when we feel like that's not what we got from our moms growing up. And I think this was huge. It was massive in both of our reparenting work, but also in like the deepening of our relationship. Like we have this history of being able to hold space for each other. And now that we're in different places and have grown a lot, like it doesn't feel, there might've been a time, where it was a little codependent and felt like, oh, I need you to help me through this. Like I need you, just like a baby needs us, developmentally we were small in these ways. Whereas now, through this process of reparenting ourselves, helping to reparent each other, it's not like I need you anymore. It's like, hey, do you have some time and space to like process something out with me? And usually the answer is yes. Sometimes it's the boundary of like, I don't right now, but can we talk this weekend? Or I'd love to, but I'm going through my own thing. And knowing the other person has other spaces to go, has their therapist, has their partner, has other friends. So it doesn't feel like it's all on me to be that person for her and vice versa. But yeah, I just think like this ability for adults to help each other like heal these parts that got missed, these parts that got dropped for us developmentally in childhood through our adult friendships is so beautiful. And it's something that has changed my life. It's something that, I even have found like in my relationship with my sister, which was not always super emotionally close. Like now we're at the point, because I've learned how to do this in friendship, where we can have these conversations and show up for each other in ways that we felt like we got dropped by our mom. And it's really, really beautiful. Another thing about secure relationships is they allow us to feel what we feel and know what we know. Especially the things that haven't felt safe to feel or know in the past. And so, if like me, you're someone who didn't really have the relationships growing up where you could say the hard things or be too much or, express your emotions in their rawest form, having friendships where they're going to love you even if you share your worst secret, if you say the thing that's scary, if you show them like your shadow self, and they're not going to run away. They're actually going to be really kind and empathetic. They're not going to judge you. They're not going to be shocked. That is the most healing thing in the world. And, that can come through a therapist, that can come through a partner, that can come through a friend, but, having that safe witness of like, I can show you whatever, and you're not going to run away, and you're not going to try to fix me, but you're just going to be here with me in it, is so, so powerful. Research also shows us that secure attachment helps us strengthen our reflective stance towards ourselves and increase our awareness of our own experience. So I think this is so cool, because what that means is like, this is literally a feedback loop. Like secure attachment feeds into embodiment. It feeds back into our ability to reflect on ourselves, our ability to have awareness of our own experience, to know what we know and feel what we feel. And then that allows us to connect even more deeply with others. And so that's why I love working kind of with both of these dynamics of connecting deeply with the self, and then connecting deeply with others, and then connecting deeply with the self, because it truly is a feedback loop that feeds into itself, which is so rad. And secure relationships can be what I call a petri dish. And what I mean by that is like a safe place to experiment, to practice new patterns with a safe other. So if we haven't had a ton of safety relationally with our parents or our family of origin, or even like romantic partners, friendships, or even a therapeutic relationship can be a really great place to practice setting a boundary, to practice telling the truth, being direct, asking for what we need, saying the thing, being vulnerable, all of these relational skills that maybe we haven't had places to try these things on, to, build skills, build these muscles. Our friendships can be the safe place to practice these patterns and to grow relationally, to be better at relationship in these ways. So, what do we do with all of this? Like, we see the connection. I hope you see the connection of relationships to embodiment, and also just the need for them, why we need relationships, that it really does help strengthen our self-concept, help us repair our wounds from childhood, helps give us, more empathy, more awareness of self, and just like overall boosts our mental health and our quality of life. So I would like to suggest, we've kind of had this theme of like ritual lately, the last few episodes. So I would like to suggest a few relational rituals that you could try. If you're like, ooh, this all sounds great, but like, how do I have better relationships? How do I find new friends? How do I build these skills and muscles in my own life? So most simply, what a relational ritual means is time together. So this could be in person, it could be on the phone, it could be on FaceTime, it could be Zoom. But really, we're just wanting to create shared experiences with safe others. And so this might mean like you go to a meetup, you go to a club, you go to, like a run club, a knitting club, a beer making club, whatever. You find, maybe proximity friends or like-minded aligned friends, and you just spend time together. You make memories, you create experiences. I talked about those work friends from grad school. We're going on trips, we're going on adventures, we're doing hikes. I didn't feel like highly connected with these people every time. But now that we've done this for years and years together, like I love my time with them. And I kind of know my expectations of like the conversations probably won't be super deep. With some of them they are, because we built that. Some of them it's kind of like surface level stuff, but like I know if we're going skiing, I want to bring these people on the trip because it's just going to be so fun and great quality time together. And so my second point is, these relational rituals can be time for shallow and deep connection. Sometimes it's hard to go deep all the time and you just need to have fun. Like my grad school girls, we can go deep all the live long day. And when we just like go out for a glass of wine and giggle, that is like the best thing in the world. So we need both of that in our friendships. Another thing that I think can be a really helpful relational ritual is building something together. Whether this is like a literal house or project or garden or car, like if you literally want to build something together, great. Or more figuratively, like I think in our last podcast, Victoria mentioned the matriarchal collective group that we're a part of, this group of entrepreneurial women who are trying to do business in a values aligned matriarchal way. And, we're building our separate businesses, but we're meeting once a week and we're talking about the struggles, the highs and the lows, the wins. We're asking questions. We're talking about personal life, how it impacts business and vice versa. We're talking about being moms, being caretakers of animals and humans, and, how we do that with also running businesses and making money and providing and being creative. And it is so, we have built such beautiful, deep friendships in a short amount of time. Like I think we've only been doing this for a year at this point. And these girls are so important to me and so valuable to me now, because we're all building something together. Even if it's not the same thing, we're being creative, we're sharing struggles, we're sharing wins. And that is so, so valuable. I also think like, not enough is said about fun and play, being spontaneous, just going out and getting ice cream or going to a movie or, just doing something fun with your people is so necessary. And, I sometimes will think about like my college years or even my time at Bethel. I loved living with roommates. And I think it's just because I am like such a high quality time person. Like I just love being with my people. And when you're living with like 4 to 6 women, like there's always someone around to like go to the grocery store together, to go for a walk, to go to a movie. Like there's just an abundance of that relational connection for quality time. And so I just want to encourage you, like, go do fun stuff with your people. Like it's summertime, just go do the thing. And if you're struggling to find those friends, those aligned friends, I think a question that, is important to ask is, who are the people who get to know what you know and how you feel? So, sometimes, especially in like the religious communities that I was a part of, it was kind of like a expectation of like, share your deepest, darkest secrets, share your whole testimony, share like everything with everyone. And there wasn't a lot of like trust built over time. There was like high vulnerability, but low trust. And I think that created for a lot of like insecure attachment, like insecure relational experience. And so I think it's important if you're feeling disappointed in friendships, if you're feeling like you can't find your people, really being thoughtful about who are the people who actually like deserve to know the inner me, to know like what I know, how I feel, like and maybe it's just one person, maybe you feel like you don't have anyone in your life right now and you need to find some people who are trustworthy in these ways. But I always say trust is built over time. It's consistency over time. And so if you're consistently, showing up for the group, showing up for the phone call, showing up for the walk together, the coffee, like you can build that trust over time to get to the vulnerable places. But, what I often see, in my own story with clients, with some people is like they're putting the vulnerability out there first and then feeling like they're never matched, feeling like people always drop them or they can't quite find their people. And so maybe focusing on like sharing less and doing more trust building activities, which is just time together. You can see what the other person is like, being curious about the other person, getting to know them first before sharing your story. I think that can be so, so helpful. And I think too, like, just want to name this in this conversation is like our spiritual life is also relational. And so what relationships are you fostering? I have friends who have really robust spiritual practices, and my friend Morgan often talks about like, she's very witchy and works with ancestors and astrology. And so she's like, with my altar will like work with a certain planet or a certain god or goddess or like a certain ancestor. And I'm like, I'm getting to know them. I'm building relationship. Like, what are they like? What are their qualities? Like what sort of like images and, food and like elements are their jam. Like, and I just think that's like such an interesting approach to spirituality of like, oh, there's like these beings, whether divine or ancestral or, part of nature or spiritual, whatever you want to call them, that we can have relationship with, we can be in communion with, we can be connecting with. And like, can we apply the same relational principles of attachment, of trust building, of like, this is a back and forth, a reciprocity, a give and take, like being curious about them, spending time with them, like often we'll pray and it's like vending machine, right? Like, God, just give me this, universe, just give me this. And it's like, well, have you invested time into that relationship? Have you nurtured it? Have you fostered connection there? And maybe that's something that, could be an interesting approach to spirituality of like how to bring more reciprocity into your spiritual relationships, more of that give and take. What are you bringing to the table? What are you receiving? What are they bringing to the table? What are they receiving from you? It's like one of my favorite ways to think about how I approach nature and spend time in nature is like, what am I bringing into this natural setting? What am I giving? What am I receiving? What is nature giving back to me? And really seeing it as an emotional and relational connection that like, I do believe that nature knows like I have an impact on the natural spaces I'm a part of. They know that I'm there. And how can I make that a positive experience and a trust building experience for the natural world that I get to steward and be a part of? And then also receive all the gifts that nature gives me and its beauty and its bounty and all the things. So I hope that this was encouraging for you just to hear about the necessity of relationship and kind of where it gets hard and tricky and sticky, but maybe some ways that we can think about it that can help move the needle on making new friends or finding community, and what some relational rituals could look like, practical things to build relationship, to form deeper connections and secure attachments with the people in your life. And if you want more added support in how to do this and how to build relationships, I think a coaching and a therapeutic relationship can be an amazing way to practice secure attachment, to build new relational patterns. And so if that's a place that you're at where you're like, I just need someone to help me figure out how to do relationships differently, how to build these skills, how to approach it in a new way, because what I'm doing right now isn't working, or I'm, I just need something new and fresh. I would love to chat. I'd love to jump on a free discovery call and see, how I can help support you in your relational rituals and finding community and co-regulation through the people in your life. So click my link in bio if you're interested in that. And I'm going to have some workshops coming up this summer. I'm hoping to launch my ritual workshop in June 2026, and then later in the summer hoping to roll out a few more. So if you're interested in that, make sure to go to my link in bio on my website and sign up for emails so you can be the first to know about all of these new offerings coming out. All right, friends, hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.